About a month ago, my life was like a huge pile of heavy, successive losses. Everything that happened to me began on that dark day. Then I returned to my house, only to discover that no one was there. My wife, my daughter Alice, and finally, my old mother, they were all outside, and this, for your information, is an unusual and thorny matter. My mother is going through a severe health illness, to the point that she is unable to walk a few steps without assistance. Also, her immune system was almost destroyed, to the point that it could lead to her death as soon as she got up from her bed and opened the window of her room to breathe some air. I was truly suspicious of this sudden absence, so I took out my phone with a trembling hand and started calling my wife. I did this to find out the worst news I had ever known before, as my wife had told me at the time that my mother had died. She told me that her bouts of illness became severe while I was at work, so she called the ambulance, which in turn came and took my mother to the hospital. Only a few hours later, the doctor directing my mother's condition came out to tell my wife that he was unable to do anything, as the hand of death was faster than his hand. An event like this changed my life entirely. As soon as the funeral ceremonies ended, sadness began to turn me into a being different from me. I neglected food, drink, work, and even my wife and young daughter, and with all my regret, the matter did not stop there, as now I had become a distinguished visitor to all the bars. I had become a drunkard addicted to alcohol. Of course, my wife did not like this sudden transformation, so she decided to separate from me. She left my house with Alice and moved in with her father, and I threatened to report it to the police if I tried to approach her or Alice again. All these miserable events made me feel hopeless and depressed. I became lonely, broke, and unemployed. I hated myself, my life, and my home, where my greatest memories are, so I decided to sell my modern house and rent instead a very small apartment in a dirty house in one of the poor neighboring areas. Of course, I did this in order to find money with which I could eat and buy the alcoholic beverages I would need during the period that I would remain unemployed. This old house is divided into 2 floors. It was similar in construction to ancient huts. The first ground floor belonged to the poor landlady, and the second floor was where I lived among my sorrows and empty whiskey bottles. Apart from all this nonsense, let me tell you about the only time I entered the house of that terrifying hag old woman. That was when we gathered together to write the lease for my new doomed apartment. I mean, specifically that moment when my feet set foot on that slippery wood floor to sit on a gnawing bench in front of the paralyzed Madame Olivia, that angry, sad lady with the wrinkled, tired features of her face affected by what she had seen throughout her life. Truth be told, I was feeling extremely suspicious of everything around me, especially that room closed with 3 huge metal locks, a side room with a huge, imposing black door. Certainly, my fear and curiosity were aroused, and my adrenaline level rose as soon as I saw that sight. So I made the worst mistake of my life and asked old Madame Olivia about the truth of that scene, and I wish she hadn't answered me.
This was my only son's room. As soon as he passed away, I decided to lock that damned room very tightly, for fear that some homeless, unlucky fool would enter it, for fear that these tormented, terrifying, evil spirits would sneak in. My son was a famous charlatan who harmed everyone who had the bad luck to meet him. He harmed many, many people, killed many animals and birds, committing the most horrible spells with their bodies, based on what he learned from magic books. He took many souls to hell, and for this reason, as soon as he died, those souls decided to take revenge on his corpse. Curses and horror themselves decided to be the inevitable fate of anyone who approached my son's coffin, that damned wooden box behind that huge black door. By the way, this door was specially designed by a priest to keep the hell inside away from me. Therefore, please be careful. Whatever happens, do not enter that room.
The old woman said those words while she was crying with fear, so I turned away from her and headed to my new apartment, which had become my little bar. A small entourage I threw on the floor next to piles of canned food. On the other hand, you'll find piles of garbage next to boxes of whiskey. What? You ask me what that crazy old woman said. Of course, I didn't pay attention to her words and didn't take them into consideration. In my opinion, she was just a woman whose grief for her son led her to suffer from several terrifying hallucinations. For God's sake, how could I believe such ridiculous nonsense? My days after that passed badly. I was still an addict, and no job would accept someone like me. So after the money I took from the person who bought my house ran out, that damn crazy old woman decided to throw me out of her filthy house. So I became a homeless person in the empty streets between the deserted alleys. And this continued until that night when I fell asleep on one of the sidewalks to see in my dream a scene of me while trying to sneak into Mrs. Olivia's house through her window, that window that led me after I broke into it, to the room that the old lady had tightly closed. As soon as my feet touched the floor of this room, the window closed behind me and made a terrifying sound. I trembled at this sound, especially when I found myself in the middle of deep darkness. At that time, I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight to see the disaster around me, a huge coffin topped with traces of clotted blood located in the middle of an empty circular room. At that time, I felt as if I was being led. I was not doing what I wanted. I was moving involuntarily towards that coffin. I removed the cover very slowly and hid my body inside it, then closed it from behind me again. I woke up terrified and high to express my happiness with this nightmare. I ignored the terrifying part of it and started laughing loudly at that wonderful idea suggested to me, my subconscious. I got up from my bed, still laughing in ecstasy. I took the bottle of whiskey that was beside me and started walking back towards Madame Olivia's house. I actually got there and started making several attempts to open the window. Finally, the latch responded to me, so I quickly pushed my body into the room without anyone seeing me and without seeing what was around me. My God! I am now standing in the middle of a dark, bloody circular room. Many animal heads are around me, hanging on the walls. Dozens of terrifying talismans and spells that are written on the walls and floors with blood. Finally, there is a huge black coffin covered with a black lid decorated with terrifying shiny red bows. The old woman was right, as if my nightmare was just a final warning to me. But I didn't do all of this, and I wish I had. I have been a prisoner in this room since I entered it, and for several years that I no longer count, so I no longer know in the first place whether I am still alive or if I have become a tormented soul among those souls whose screams I hear Every